this we started into this because we were talking about the Chicago Burlington and Quincy and the Colorado and Southern, and how the Montana and Wyoming Coal really changed the whole complexion of that railroad and ultimately of the Burlington Northern. So we left off last time. We were looking at John Hill's picture of the copper's coke, because we were looking at metallurgical coal. Mm-hmm. And metallurgical coke, which is made from coal. And so we see here, this is he took this in 1970, I think, from the Snelling Avenue Bridge. It's used to make steel, because you take iron ore and you add carbon, and that's how they make steel, various concentrations. And so it's 14,000 BTUs per pound, and it's almost pure carbon. And so here they're bringing coal from, most likely bituminous coal from Illinois, coming up on the Burlington, and they would just put it in ovens and make, it's almost like charcoal, and they make metallurgical coke. Well, the other type of coke that there is the petroleum coke. Now, this is a picture of Pine Bend Refinery, and when they crack oil, they start and they put it in these cracking towers, and basically they boil it, and then the stuff with the lowest boiling point goes off, and then they collect it. Well, like, first thing would be methane, that would come off right away, and then some of the light distillates, and then gasoline, and then finally diesel fuel, and then they get down to the very heavy oils, bunker A, bunker C, bunker B, bunker C, that type of really heavy oils that you almost have to heat to get it to flow. And then when they're all done, they put it over here and they get a cake. It's coke, and it's a solid residue. It's just like the other coke, but it's 14,000 BTUs per pound, much like anthracite coal, but it's higher in sulfur, because in the first place, coke uses what they call sour crude. That's coming up from Oklahoma and Texas. It's a oil that has, this is coke refinery, which gets confusing with making coke, KOCH, but they know how to handle sour crude, which has sulfur. And so as they do this, of course, it concentrates some of the impurities in the oil. And so they end up with this coke down here, and then they put it in railroad cars, and they also put it in trucks, and utilities burn it, and they use it for other processes. But like anthracite, it burns very slowly, and the trick to it is that it also contains some trace metals like vanadium and cadmium and other things like that. So that's petroleum coke. So we look at we'll look at mining process, and they started underground by hand. They would get to they'd find a seam, and they'd go into the side of a hill and with picks and shovels. And then eventually they had little carts, and then they built a railroad and pushed the carts by hand. Then they had donkeys hauling them. And then they finally, there was actually a guy in the United Kingdom that said, well, we have these big steam driven pumps to pump the water out of the mine, and steam driven elevators, big pulleys that are driven by steam. He said, well, why don't we use a little steam locomotive to haul the coal? And that's how the steam engine was invented. That was early in the 1800s. And then they started using pneumatic tools, and then underground, they built underground railroads, and then eventually they had coal haulers, and then they used longwall mining as well. So typical coal mine in the 50s and 60s, they have a railroad down there, and then they have these electric locomotives pulling little tiny coal cars around, and it has a shoe like a trolley pole, and it comes into this thing here, which is an electric contact. And of course they try to shield it as much as possible, because there's methane down there, so you don't want any arcing. And you can see the big pipes here, because they have to constantly pump water out of the mine, and then of course they're blowing air in and sucking the methane out. It's a tough business. Well, then eventually they started using these coal haulers, which I think are butane powered, but they're much more flexible than having a railroad. So it's a kind of a miniature scraper. They would haul the coal to the shaft to take it out. And then eventually they got into long wall mining. And this is where they have a long seam and they go sideways along the seam. And they have this huge machine. This holds up the roof. And then they got this big thing that looks like something out of Star Wars, grinding the coal. And then it has a screw, pulls the coal back here and dumps it into a little conveyor. And it goes to the place where they take it out of the mine. And so this big thing goes back and forth and back and forth. And then this whole machine will move backwards. And so they move forward. After this is all empty, then they'll move the machine forward, and they just keep doing it, and they let the stuff behind it just collapse. So it's a long wall mining. It's a way of mechanizing that and speeding up the whole process. So
it reminds me, they used to have these ads for clean coal, and somebody's comment on that was, ever see a picture of a miner coming off shift? Notice how clean he was.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's a dirty business. And I worked at a coal-fired power plant, and I can tell you there were days I looked like a coal miner coming out of there. It's dusty and it's carbon. Yeah. But back to Montana Coal, there's this couple of seams, the Rosebud and the McKay seams here that are pretty good seams of coal. It's subbituminous coal, but the Northern Pacific figured out. Remember, they have this checkerboard of land that they were given by the government. The government had given the Union Pacific a bunch of money to build the UP across the country, and that didn't go very well because we had Durant and General Dodge creating Credit Mobilier and all this other stuff, and they absconded with some of the money. They did get the railroad built. I'll give them credit for that. But so the government thought, well, we're going to give the Northern Pacific this huge land grant, 44 million acres. And so it was like so many, a checkerboard, each side of the railroad, all the way from the Puget Sound, Duluth, all the way to Seattle. And so they have all this land, and they own some of the coal here. So they said, well, we ought to burn our own coal in the locomotives. And so here's a coal strip mine's been there for many years. And so they were burning this low energy coal. And so they had to have huge fireboxes. So this is the famous Yellowstone locomotive that they had built, a 2884. And at the time in the late 20s, this was the largest steam locomotive built at that time. And it's got all the NP Northern Pacific features. It's got a huge stack. They always like these big, huge stacks. And but this thing was not built for the mountains, interestingly. It was built for this area here because they go up and down and up and down. They're going across the rivers. And then that's very difficult because when you come into the Red River Valley, and there actually is a valley there. It's really wide, but it's a valley. Well, then you go up high, and then you come down into the James River Valley, and then you have to go up again, and then you go down into the Missouri River Valley, and then it just continues all the way until they get alongside the Yellowstone River out here. And so they wanted a big engine that they could haul trains and keep the speed up, but it had to have this huge firebox. This is the firebox. Look at the size of that thing to burn this subbituminous low energy coal. Well, some of the utilities said, that stuff is pretty cheap, and we could burn that. And so Minnesota Power in Cohasset, Minnesota, which is right by Grand Rapids, the NP was hauling coal to Fargo, and then they'd go up to Grand Forks, and then they'd haul it over to Cohasset, and they would burn it in the power plant up there. And they also started hauling it to Duluth and shipping it out on lake boats. They hauled it down here and to Milwaukee and Chicago. And then Milwaukee got into it because there were several plants here that were burning this Montana coal.